They laughed when I presented my findings. Reed Holloway, our CFO, actually called my audit adorable in front of the entire board. 3 weeks later, federal agents walked through those same glass doors at 7:15 a.m., and his name was the first one they called. I'd spent 6 years being invisible in that office, but they all remembered me when that $42 million fine landed. Funny how a spreadsheet becomes less cute when the IRS stamps their seal on it. My name is Vanessa Crowley, and for 6 years, I was the most forgettable person at Frontier Axis Capital. At 34, I'd perfected the art of being professionally invisible, arriving at 7:30 a.m. sharp, leaving at 6 p.m., producing flawless reports that landed on executives' desks without anyone wondering who created them. My cubicle sat in the corner of the 11th floor, strategically positioned where the overhead light flickered just enough to discourage visitors. I liked it that way. Numbers didn't lie. Didn't play politics. Didn't care if you wore designer suits or the same 3 blazers on rotation like I did. In the world of internal auditing, being forgotten meant being trusted, and trust, in a firm managing $8 billion in assets, was everything. The assignment came on a Tuesday morning via email, marked low priority. Routine audit of executive operational expenses, Q3, Q4. I almost deleted it. Executive expenses were usually pristine, triple-checked by assistants who knew their boss's preferences down to the brand of sparkling water they drank. But something made me open the attachment. It was small stuff at first. A conference in Miami that showed registration for 12 executives, but hotel receipts for 18 rooms, catering invoices that didn't match headcounts, transport costs that seemed inflated by about 30%. Any single item could be explained away. People make mistakes, plans change, prices fluctuate, but patterns were my specialty. I spent 3 weeks in that flickering corner, cross-referencing credit card statements with expense reports, matching vendor invoices with actual services rendered. The paper trail led me through shell companies with names like Premium Business Solutions and Executive Support Services, generic enough to pass a cursory glance, suspicious enough to anyone who looked closer. By week 4, I had it mapped out. Someone was using operational expenses as a personal piggy bank, billing the company for services that either didn't exist or cost a fraction of what was claimed. The amounts were clever, never quite large enough to trigger automatic reviews, but consistent enough to add up. We were talking about $2.3 million in questionable expenses over 18 months. I printed everything, organized it into a binder with color-coded tabs that would make a librarian weep with joy. The meeting with Reed Holloway was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. He kept me waiting 23 minutes, which I spent sitting in his assistant's area, watching the city through floor-to-ceiling windows that made my cubicle feel like a cave. When his door finally opened, Reed stood there in his $3,000 suit, looking at me like he was trying to remember if I was the IT help or someone's assistant. Vanessa, right from internal audit. His smile was practiced, the kind that never reached his eyes. Come in. Let's see what you've got. His office was bigger than my apartment, all leather and mahogany and that specific smell of success that only comes from very expensive cologne. I spread my findings across his conference table, walking him through each flag transaction, every suspicious pattern. He listened with his hands steepled, occasionally making a sound that might have been interest or might have been suppressed laughter. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is thorough," he said, and the way he said it made thorough sound like a disease. "Very adorable. Actually, you've clearly put a lot of work into this little audit." Little audit. The words hung in the air between us like a slap I wasn't allowed to return. "I should clarify something. Vanessa," he stood, walking to the window with his hands clasped behind his back. "These operational expenses support critical business development. Sometimes that means flexibility in how we categorize things. It's not fraud. It's strategic financial management. Sir, with respect, these shell companies are vendors we've worked with for years." He turned, and his smile had shifted into something harder. "I appreciate your diligence, but I think you might be misunderstanding the complexities of executive-level operations. Why don't you leave this with me? I'll review it with the board and get back to you." I knew then, the way he didn't ask for clarification, didn't question a single finding, didn't even pretend to be surprised. He knew exactly what I'd found because he was the architect of it all. I left my binder on his table, walked back to my flickering corner, and started making copies of everything, because when someone calls your work adorable, they're not just dismissing your findings, they're telling you exactly how much they underestimate you. And that was their first mistake. The email came Monday morning at 8:47 a.m. Mandatory meeting, conference room A, 9 a.m., sharp, Reed Holloway. No subject line, no context. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. Conference room A was the fishbowl glass walls on 3 sides, positioned so everyone walking by could see inside. It was where they held the big announcements, promotions, acquisitions, and occasionally, executions. I arrived at 8:58 to find it already full. The entire senior management team sat around the polished table like judges at a tribunal. Reed stood at the head, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Ah, Vanessa, please, have a seat." He gestured to the single empty chair at the far end of the table. The walk felt like miles, every executive's eyes tracking my movement. I recognized most of them: Patricia Morse from legal, David Kellerman from operations, Susan Park from HR. None of them would meet my gaze. "I wanted to thank you," Reed began, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "For your recent audit work, your attention to detail is remarkable." He paused, letting the words sink in. "In fact, it's so remarkable that it's raised some concerns." My mouth went dry. "Concerns? About your judgment." He picked up a paper from the table. I recognized my executive summary. "You see, Vanessa, there's a difference between being thorough and being problematic. Your report contains accusations that could damage relationships with valued vendors, create unnecessary panic among shareholders, and frankly, suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of how business operates at this level. I never made accusations. I simply documented patterns. Yes, you mentioned that." His smile widened. "But patterns can be deceiving when you don't have the full picture. Which brings me to why we're here." He nodded to Susan from HR, who slid a folder across the table to me. "Effective immediately. You're being reassigned to customer data management. It's a lateral move, same salary, same benefits. Think of it as an opportunity to broaden your skill set. Customer data management, the corporate equivalent of Siberia, a department that existed primarily to maintain outdated databases and respond to client complaints about billing errors. No access to financial systems, no proximity to executive operations, no ability to see anything that mattered." "This isn't optional," Reed continued, his voice silk over steel. "Your last day in internal audit is Wednesday. We'll need your company laptop and all materials related to your recent projects by then." "All materials." I kept my voice steady. "Everything. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings to persist." He looked around the table. "Does anyone have questions for Vanessa?" Silence. Patricia Morse studied her manicure. David Kellerman checked his phone. Susan Park clicked her pen repeatedly, the only sound in the room besides the hum of air conditioning. "No, well then." Reed straightened his tie. "Vanessa, I want you to know this isn't personal. Sometimes an employee's enthusiasm can outpace their experience. Consider this a chance to recalibrate." That's when I understood the full scope of it. This wasn't just about shutting down my audit, it was about discrediting me completely. By the time I left this room, the story would be set. Overzealous junior auditor misinterprets routine expenses, makes wild accusations, has to be reassigned for her own good. Poor Vanessa. Tried too hard, reached too far, didn't understand how things really worked. "One question," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Who authorized this reassignment?" Reed's smile faltered for just a second. "The executive committee made the decision unanimously, for the good of the company." Unanimously, which meant everyone in this room had signed off on bearing me. I looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces, their nervous tics, their calculated silence. David Kellerman's finger tapped against his portfolio, the same portfolio I'd flagged for suspicious vendor payments. Patricia Morse's pendant necklace caught the light, a Cartier piece I'd seen receipted as a client appreciation gift that somehow never made it to a client. I understand, I said finally. May I be excused? I have work to transition. Of course. Reed's relief was palpable. And Vanessa, we trust you'll handle this transition with the same professionalism you've always shown. I stood, gathering the HR folder without looking at it. The walk to the door felt different this time, not like shame, but like clarity. As I reached for the handle, Reed's voice stopped me. Oh, and Vanessa, that audit you were so proud of, I had it reviewed by external consultants. They found it quite… what was the word they used? He pretended to think. Ah yes, adorable. They said it was adorable how you'd confuse standard business practices with something sinister. The laughter that followed me out was quiet, but unmistakable. The kind of laughter that comes when powerful people think they've won, when they've successfully crushed someone too small to matter. They probably forgot about me before I even reached the elevator. But I didn't forget them, and I certainly didn't forget that Reed had just admitted to sharing internal audit documents with external consultants, a violation of company policy that would be very interesting to federal investigators. By the time I reached my cubicle, I'd already begun planning. They wanted my materials by Wednesday. They'd get them, but first, I had some copying to do. Tuesday night, 11:43 p.m., the office was empty except for security guards who barely glanced at my badge. Being invisible had its advantages. No one questioned why Vanessa from Audit was working late. It was what I did, what I'd always done. My access wouldn't be revoked until Thursday morning at 9 a.m. I knew because I'd processed enough terminations to understand HR's timeline. They'd send the deactivation request Wednesday afternoon. It would action it overnight, and by Thursday, I'd be locked out of everything that mattered. That gave me 33 hours and 17 minutes. I started with the basics: every email, every document, every spreadsheet I'd touched in the past 3 years, but that wasn't what I was really after. During my audit, I discovered something Reed didn't know I knew: a shared drive that hadn't been properly restricted. It contained draft contracts, board meeting minutes, and most importantly, unredacted vendor agreements going back 5 years. The coffee machine gurgled as I worked, its bitter smell keeping me alert. By 2 a.m., I had 4 external hard drives running simultaneous backups. By 3:30 a.m., I'd found the thread that would unravel everything. It was an email chain from 2022, buried in a folder labeled Archived Facilities Management. Reed had been sloppy back then, before he'd learned to use encrypted channels. The subject line read, Re-Q4 Adjustment Strategy, but the content was explosive. Dave, need you to process these invoices through the Phoenix Vendor Premium Business Solutions. Split them across departments to avoid triggering reviews. Make sure Patricia backdates the approvals. Target is 4.7 mil by year end. IRS audit prep meeting. Thursday, need everything clean by then. 4.7 million in 1 quarter, and there it was. Black and white. IRS audit prep meeting. They'd been doing this for years, systematically inflating expenses and skimming the excess through shell companies. My little audit had only scratched the surface. I found more: contracts with vendors that shared addresses with Reed's vacation properties, board members approving expenses for companies they secretly owned, a web of financial fraud so intricate it was almost beautiful, if you ignored the fact that it was stealing from shareholders and cheating on taxes. By 5 a.m., I had everything organized into folders with names like Contract Discrepancies, Vendor Analysis, and my personal favorite, Email Communications Unredacted. 42 gigabytes of evidence that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. The sun was rising when I finally leaned back in my chair. My eyes burned. My back ached, but I felt more alive than I had in 6 years. They thought they'd neutralized me, packed me off to data management like a problem solved. They had no idea that they'd just given me the motivation and the access to destroy them. I made one more discovery before my time ran out. In Reed's sent folder, misfiled under draft, was an email he'd never meant to send, dated 6 months ago, addressed to David Kellerman. Re-Crowley situation. If she keeps digging, we may need to take decisive action. Can't have another Martinez situation. Remember what happened when he found the Phoenix accounts? At least he took the buyout quietly. Not sure Crowley would be so accommodating. Keep an eye on her. Martinez. Roberto Martinez from Audit. who'd suddenly decided to pursue other opportunities last year, who'd left without a goodbye party, whose LinkedIn still showed him as unemployed. I'd found my audit predecessor, and apparently, I'd found his fate too. But there was one critical difference between Roberto and me. He'd probably confronted them privately, tried to handle it internally like a good corporate soldier. He'd given them time to react, to plan, to buy him off or force him out. I wasn't going to make that mistake. Wednesday morning, I showed up at 8 a.m. sharp with a banker's box of personal items photos I'd never displayed, a coffee mug I'd never used, the detritus of a corporate life that never really existed. I spent the day transitioning my official audit files, smiling blandly as my soon-to-be former colleagues avoided eye contact. "Shame about the reassignment," Jennifer from Accounts Payable whispered by the printer. "You were good at your job." "Too good, apparently," I replied, watching her nervous laugh. By 5 p.m., I'd handed over my laptop, my keycard, and my company phone. Susan from HR had me sign 17 different documents, all variations on the theme of "keep your mouth shut." I signed them all with a smile. After all, they only covered what I'd learned as an employee. They said nothing about what I might do as a concerned citizen. That night, from my personal laptop in my studio apartment, I compiled everything into a single encrypted file, 88 pages of analysis, cross-referenced and annotated, with supporting documentation that would make Reed's external consultants look like the fiction they were. I had the evidence, I had the motivation. Now I just needed the right weapon to wield it. It was time to make a phone call. Lori Campos answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that particular exhaustion that comes from working tax law for the federal government. We'd met at Georgetown Law's alumni mixer 2 years ago, bonding over terrible wine and worse career choices. She'd gone public sector while I'd chosen corporate, and we'd stayed in touch through occasional coffee meetings where we compared horror stories. "Vanessa, it's 9:30 p.m. on a Thursday. This better be good. How good is $42 million in tax fraud?" The silence stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from tired to alert. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious, and I have documentation." "Jesus. Okay, we can't discuss this over the phone. Can you meet tomorrow?" "There's a coffee shop on K Street Neutral Grounds, 7 a.m. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early with a flash drive tucked in my jacket pocket and a leather portfolio containing printed highlights. Lori showed up exactly on time, looking every inch the federal attorney in her navy suit and practical flats. She chose a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances, a habit. She'd once told me, from dealing with people who didn't always appreciate the IRS's attention. "Before we start," she said, settling in with her black coffee, "I need to ask, are you looking for whistleblower protection? Because that's a whole different process." "I'm looking for justice," I said, which sounded more dramatic out loud than it had in my head. "And maybe to watch some people who laughed at me explain themselves to federal investigators." Lori's smile was sharp, vindictive. "I like it. Show me what you've got." For the next hour, I walked her through everything: the shell companies, the inflated invoices, the email trails. Her expression grew progressively more serious as she flipped through pages, occasionally whistling low at particularly damaging evidence. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "How long did this take you to compile?" 3 weeks of official investigation, 48 hours of unofficial evidence gathering, and 6 years of being invisible enough that nobody thought to lock me out of systems I shouldn't have accessed. That last part, we're going to pretend I didn't hear that. She tapped a page showing the Phoenix vendor payments. "But this is exactly what we need. Clear pattern of tax evasion, fraudulent deductions, and what looks like good old-fashioned embezzlement. The email about IRS audit prep is particularly damning." "So you'll take it?" "Oh, I'll do more than take it. I'm going to fast-track this to criminal investigation. But first, we need to do this properly." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "Form 3949A is the standard reporting mechanism, but with evidence this substantial, we can expedite. How do you feel about being a confidential informant?" "Do I get to stay anonymous?" "To the public, yes. To the investigators, no. But your name won't appear in any public filings unless this goes to trial and you're needed as a witness. She studied me over her coffee cup. There's something else. The IRS has a whistleblower reward program. If your information leads to collection, you could receive 15 to 30% of what we recover. I hadn't known about that. 15% of 42 million was significant. That's not why I'm doing this. I know, but it's a nice bonus for taking down assholes who called your work adorable. She pulled out a legal pad. Now, let's go through the process. You'll file Form 211 along with your documentation. I'll personally walk it through to make sure it lands on the right desk. Criminal investigation will likely want to interview you within 2 weeks. Can you handle that? I've handled Reed Holloway laughing in my face. I can handle anything. She made notes as I spoke, her handwriting precise and economical. One thing that comment in your data about, he called it a cute little audit. Let's see how cute it feels under federal review. We should probably... Leave it, I interrupted. I want them to know this came from me. Maybe not officially, but when Reed's lawyer shows him the filing, I want him to read that line and know exactly who ended him. Lori laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from other early morning coffee seekers. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Okay, let's draft this properly. Full corporate names, IANs, specific tax years affected. We'll file it Monday morning, gives me the weekend to prep my supervisors for what's coming. We spent another 2 hours crafting the perfect complaint. Every accusation supported by evidence, every claim backed by documentation. By the time we finished, the coffee shop had filled with the usual DC crowd of lobbyists and lawyers, none of them aware that we were building a case that would soon make headlines. One last thing, Lori said as we prepared to leave. Once this is filed, there's no taking it back. The investigation will proceed regardless of any pressure they might try to apply. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Reed's smirk, about the executives who'd sat silent while I was exiled, about Roberto Martinez who'd disappeared quietly when he'd found what I'd found. I've been prepared since the moment they underestimated me. Good. She tucked the flash drive into her briefcase. Because based on what you've shown me, Frontier Axis Capital is about to learn what a real audit looks like, and I promise you, the IRS won't find it adorable at all. As I left the coffee shop, I felt the weight of 3 years lifting from my shoulders. They thought they'd buried me in customer data management, safely contained and neutralized. They had no idea they'd simply given me the time and motivation to load the gun that would end them. Monday morning, while Reed was probably sipping his overpriced coffee and reviewing his fraudulent expense reports, a form would land on a federal investigator's desk, a form with my name on it, my evidence attached, and one particular line that would echo through the halls of Frontier Axis Capital. He called it a cute little audit. Let's see how cute it feels under federal review. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in corporate theater. From my exile in customer data management, a windowless suite on the 3rd floor that smelled perpetually of old carpet and broken dreams, I watched Frontier Axis Capital prepare for its grand finale. The IPO roadshow kicked off with typical fanfare. Press releases flooded financial media, touting our robust growth trajectory and innovative investment strategies. Reed appeared on CNBC, confident and polished, fielding softball questions about market expansion. The stock price climbed steadily as institutional investors circled like hungry sharks scenting blood in the water. They just didn't realize whose blood it would be. My new role was mind-numbing by design. 8 hours a day reconciling customer addresses, updating phone numbers, generating reports nobody read. My supervisor, Marcus Wheeler, was a decent man who'd clearly been briefed to keep me busy but contained. He assigned me projects with apologetic shrugs, both of us understanding I was serving a corporate sentence. But exile had its advantages. Nobody paid attention to the data management team. We were digital janitors, invisible and irrelevant, which meant I could monitor the company's pulse without anyone noticing. The first sign came 3 weeks after I'd filed with the IRS. An unusual number of meetings appeared on the executive calendar, all marked legal review, or compliance discussion, the company's outside counsel, a white shoe firm that billed more per hour than I made in a day, suddenly had partners camping out in our conference rooms. Patricia Morse from legal started looking haggard. Her usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. designer bags appearing under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I passed her in the hallway one Tuesday afternoon, and she actually flinched when she saw me. "Vanessa," she said, forcing a smile, "how's the new role treating you?" "It's enlightening," I replied, which was true in ways she couldn't imagine. "Amazing what you can see from the ground floor." She hurried away without responding, her heels clicking a nervous staccato on the marble floor. By week 4, the tremors became earthquakes. A company-wide email announced routine documentation reviews by our audit firm. Employees were instructed to preserve all records and cooperate fully with any requests. The tone was professionally calm, but I recognized panic when I saw it. Reed maintained his facade brilliantly. At the monthly all-hands meeting, he stood at the podium radiating confidence, talking about Q4 projections and strategic initiatives. But I noticed his tells the way he gripped the podium edges, how his eyes never quite focused on any one person, the slight tremor in his hand when he reached for his water glass. "Questions?" he asked at the end, scanning the room with practiced ease. I raised my hand from my spot in the back, wedged between two data analysts who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Reed's smile froze when he spotted me. "Yes, Vanessa. Just wondering about the increased legal presence. Should we be concerned about any compliance issues affecting the IPO timeline?" The room went silent. 200 employees suddenly found their phones fascinating. "Not at all," Reed replied smoothly. "Standard due diligence. As someone now working in data management, I'm sure you understand the importance of dotting I's and crossing T's." "Absolutely," I said. "After all, you never know what might turn up in a routine review." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Any other questions?" There weren't. The next morning, chaos arrived in a government sedan. I was updating customer records when Marcus burst into our office area, face flushed with excitement. "Holy shit," he announced to our small team. "There are federal agents in the lobby, like actual badges and everything." I kept my eyes on my screen, typing steadily. "Probably just routine," I offered. "Maybe someone forgot to pay parking tickets." But through our internal messaging system, the real story spread like wildfire. IRS criminal investigation had arrived with warrants. They were boxing up documents from the executive floor. Reed's office was being sealed off. By lunch, the parking lot looked like a federal convoy. Black SUVs with government plates lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. Employees clustered in the break rooms, whispering theories and updating their resumes. Susan from HR sent a department-wide email at 2:17 p.m. "Please remain calm and continue normal operations. We are cooperating fully with authorities conducting a routine review." Routine, there was that word again, the corporate equivalent of nothing to see here, while the building burned down around us. I stayed late that night, ostensibly catching up on data entry. In reality, I was savoring every moment. The executive floor was dark except for conference room A, the fishbowl where they'd humiliated me weeks before. Through the glass walls, I could see Reed, Patricia, David, and a phalanx of lawyers hunched over documents, their faces drawn and desperate. At 9:43 p.m., my personal phone buzzed. Lori, texting from her personal number. "Saw the news. Your package was very well received. Expect things to accelerate quickly." I deleted the message and went back to updating customer addresses. A small smile playing at my lips. They'd laughed at my little audit. They'd called it adorable. Dismissed it as the overreach of someone who didn't understand how real business worked. Now federal agents were carrying their real business out in bankers' boxes while they huddled with lawyers who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. Funny how perspectives change when the IRS comes knocking. Suddenly, my little audit didn't seem so adorable anymore. The news broke on a Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake, nursing coffee in my kitchen when my phone exploded with notifications. CNBC's breaking news banner scrolled across my laptop screen. Frontier Axis Capital under federal investigation for tax fraud. By the time I reached the office at 8 a.m., the parking lot was a media circus. News vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone wearing a company badge. I kept my head down. Just another invisible employee in the crowd. Inside was worse. The executive floor was sealed off with yellow tape like a crime scene. Security guards stood at every elevator, checking badges and turning away anyone without essential business. The trading floor, usually buzzing with activity, had gone silent. Monitors showed our stock price in freefall down 37% in pre-market trading. An emergency all-hands meeting was called for 9 a.m. We packed into the main conference hall, a sea of confused and frightened faces. The stage where Reed usually held court was empty except for a single podium and a woman I didn't recognize, Margaret Stern, from the board of directors. "I'll be direct," she began, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "As you may have heard, Frontier Axis Capital is cooperating with a federal investigation into alleged financial irregularities. Effective immediately, several executives have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation." The names came like hammer blows: Reed Holloway, Patricia Morse, David Kellerman, each one a participant in that conference room ambush, now facing their own execution. "The IPO has been indefinitely postponed," Stern continued. "We are committed to full transparency and cooperation with authorities. Any employee contacted by investigators should immediately notify legal counsel." Questions erupted from the floor, but Stern raised a hand. "I understand you have concerns. HR will be available for individual meetings. For now, please return to your duties. We will weather this storm together." The crowd dispersed slowly, clusters forming to dissect every word. I drifted back to data management, where Marcus was refreshing news sites obsessively. 42 million, he said, eyes wide. "They're saying the fraud could be $42 million. How did nobody notice that?" "Someone must have," I said mildly. "Eventually." The afternoon brought more revelations. A leaked memo suggested the IRS had received detailed documentation from an insider. The investigation had been building for weeks, with agents quietly subpoenaing records and freezing accounts. Reed's assets had been seized that morning, including his house in Georgetown and the vacation property in the Hamptons that had appeared in my audit as a corporate retreat facility. At 4:23 p.m., my desk phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Vanessa Crowley. The voice was familiar but stripped of its usual arrogance. "Reed." "Mr. Holloway," I said carefully. "I'm surprised you're calling." "Cut the shit." His composure cracked completely. "I know it was you. The little audit comment in the IRS filing, who else would write that?" I said nothing, letting silence fill the space between us. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice rose, tinged with desperation. "This isn't just about me. Hundreds of people work here. Their retirement funds, their livelihoods. You've destroyed all of it for what?" "Because I hurt your feelings." "You stole $42 million, I said quietly. "You committed tax fraud. You destroyed Roberto Martinez when he found out before me. You didn't hurt my feelings. Reed, you broke the law." "I can fix this," he said quickly. "My lawyers say if the whistleblower withdraws their cooperation, it complicates the case. I'll pay you. $2 million cash. Offshore. Untraceable. Just tell them you made a mistake." I actually laughed. "You're trying to bribe a federal witness. Are you recording this call because I hope you are? It'll save the prosecutor's time." $3 million, $5 million, name your price." "I already did. $42 million in recovered taxes ought to do it." I paused, savoring the moment. "Oh, and Reed, you asked if your audit was still cute." "You self-righteous—" "It was adorable, almost as adorable as you thinking I'd disappear quietly like Roberto did. Enjoy federal prison. I hear the orange jumpsuits really bring out your eyes." I hung up before he could respond, then immediately called Lori to report the attempted bribe. Another nail in his coffin. Gift wrapped and delivered. That evening, as I packed up my desk, Susan from HR appeared with an envelope. Inside was a letter from the board of directors and a check. "Severance?" I asked, unsurprised. Of course they'd want me gone. "The board feels it's best for all parties to part ways amicably," Susan said, not meeting my eyes. 3 months' pay, full benefits extension, and a glowing recommendation letter, in exchange for the standard confidentiality agreements. I'd expected this. Whistleblowers were heroes in movies, pariahs in real life. Even though I'd exposed the rot, I was still the one who'd brought down the house. Nobody likes the person who turns on the lights at the party. I'll need to review this with my attorney, I said, tucking the envelope away. Susan nodded quickly and retreated, probably relieved I hadn't made a scene. She didn't know I had no intention of signing anything. My real payday was coming from the IRS, and no confidentiality agreement could silence federal testimony. As I carried my banker's box through the lobby one last time, I passed the wall of executive portraits. Reed's had already been removed, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall like a ghost. Soon Patricia's and David's would follow, a whole gallery of disgrace. Outside, the news vans were still running live shots. A reporter was saying something about the biggest corporate tax fraud case in Massachusetts history, and unnamed whistleblower whose detailed documentation broke the case wide open. Unnamed for now, but someday, when the trials were over and the sentences handed down, I'd tell my story. The invisible auditor who brought down an empire with a spreadsheet and a refusal to be dismissed. They'd laughed at my little audit. Nobody was laughing anymore. The call from Ernst & Sterling came 2 weeks later, while I was sitting in my pajamas at 11 a.m., watching Reed's perp walk replay on the financial news. The footage was glorious, him trying to shield his face with a briefcase while federal agents guided him into a black SUV, his $3,000 suit wrinkled from a night in custody. Ms. Crowley. This is James Morrison, managing partner at Ernst & Sterling's Boston office. I believe we have a mutual interest in discussing your future. Ernst & Sterling, one of the Big Four accounting firms, the kind of place where Frontier Axis employees dreamed of working. I muted the TV, where a commentator was explaining how the fraud had expanded to implicate 12 executives across 3 states. I'm listening, I said carefully. Your work on the Frontier case has generated significant attention in our industry, thorough, methodical, and most importantly, fearless. We're establishing a new division focused on internal fraud detection and regulatory compliance. We need someone to lead it, someone with proven instincts and an unwillingness to be intimidated. You want to hire the whistleblower who just torpedoed her own company? Morrison chuckled. We want to hire the auditor who uncovered $42 million in fraud that multiple external reviews missed. The woman who documented everything so meticulously that the IRS is calling it one of the cleanest cases they've ever prosecuted. The fact that you stood up to executive pressure is a feature, not a bug. The offer was everything I'd never dared dream of. Senior Director of Forensic Audit Services, a team of 20 investigators, salary that tripled what Frontier had paid me, and most importantly, the authority to dig wherever the numbers led, without fear of being buried in customer data management. When do I start? I asked. 3 days later, the Boston Globe ran a feature on the Frontier collapse, the $42 million fraud, how one auditor brought down a financial giant. They hadn't named me. I was still protected as a federal witness, but the details were all there, the suspicious patterns, the shell companies, the executive arrogance that assumed no one would dare look too closely. Reed's assets were being liquidated. Patricia Morse had flipped, agreeing to testify in exchange for reduced charges. David Kellerman was rumored to be negotiating a plea deal. The Dominican Republic was reconsidering its extradition treaty after 2 more executives fled there with suitcases full of cash. My personal favorite detail: the IRS had found another $18 million in hidden assets during their investigation, $60 million total, making my original audit look conservative. The whistleblower reward would be calculated on the full amount recovered. I did the math while packing up my apartment for the move to Boston. 15% of $60 million, $9 million for refusing to be adorable, for being too thorough, for not knowing my place. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about justice. My first day at Ernst & Sterling was a Monday. Corner office on the 32nd floor, with windows overlooking Boston Harbor. My assistant, Kevin, had already set up my computer and arranged my credentials. On my desk was a single file, a potential fraud case at a pharmaceutical company that previous auditors had flagged but couldn't prove. "Welcome to the team," Morrison said, stopping by with coffee. "Fair warning, your reputation precedes you. Half the executives in Boston are terrified you'll look at their books. The other half are busy cleaning them up just in case." "Good," I said, opening the file. Fear is a powerful motivator for honesty. That afternoon, an email appeared in my personal inbox. No subject line. Sender address clearly spoofed. I almost deleted it as spam until I saw the first line. Vanessa, by the time you read this, I'll be in federal custody. It was from Reed, not the polished executive who'd mocked my work, but a broken man facing 20 years in prison. I won't apologize. We both know I'm not sorry for what I did. Only that I got caught. But I need you to know something. When you walked into my office with that binder, I knew. I knew you'd found everything. I knew you were dangerous. That's why I tried to bury you. The mistake wasn't underestimating your audit, it was underestimating you. You're right when someone laughs at your work. Sometimes it's not a joke. Sometimes it's fear. Enjoy the view from your new office. You earned it. Read. P.S. They're seizing the Hamptons house next week. I hear the IRS is considering turning it into a training facility for forensic auditors. They're thinking of calling it the Crowley Center. Seems fitting. I read it twice, then deleted it. No need to keep trophies from a war I'd already won. That evening, I stood at my office window, watching the sunset paint Boston Harbor gold. Somewhere across the city, Reed was probably meeting with his lawyers, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Patricia was cutting deals. David was liquidating assets. The executives who'd laughed along in that conference room were updating their resumes and hoping their names stayed out of the indictments. And me, I was exactly where I'd never expected to be. Visible, powerful, feared. My phone buzzed. Lori, texting congratulations on the new job and a screenshot of the latest news, Frontier Axis Capital to file, Chapter 11, bankruptcy following fraud scandal. I smiled, remembering Reed's words from that day in his office. He'd called my work adorable, thorough in that patronizing way that meant obsessive, said I didn't understand how business worked at the executive level. He was wrong about the last part. I understood perfectly. I just refused to accept it. 1 month into my new role at Ernst & Sterling, I was reviewing quarterly reports when Kevin knocked on my door. Ms. Crowley, you might want to see this. He handed me a tablet displaying the Wall Street Journal's front page. Former Frontier Axis CFO Reed Holloway sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The photo showed Reed in an orange jumpsuit, his executive swagger replaced by the hollow look of a man who'd lost everything. The article detailed the verdict: guilty on 37 counts of tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge had called it a breathtaking breach of fiduciary duty and public trust. 18 years. He'd be 70 when he got out. His career destroyed. His reputation in ruins. All for money he didn't even need. For the thrill of thinking he was untouchable. I set the tablet aside and went back to my reports. There was no satisfaction in his downfall. No victory dance. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The scales had been weighted unfairly for years. Now they were even. My desk held 2 framed items now. The first was my original audit report, the one Reed had scrawled "not material enough" across in red ink, a reminder of where I'd started. The second was newer, the official IRS determination letter confirming my whistleblower award, $9.3 million, deposited quietly into a trust account I hadn't touched yet. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the money. Roberto Martinez had started a nonprofit helping corporate whistleblowers navigate the legal system. Maybe I'd contribute there. Or fund forensic accounting scholarships for students who, like me, believed numbers could tell the truth when people wouldn't. A soft chime indicated a new email. The sender made me pause. Roberto Martinez himself. Vanessa, I heard about everything. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. They offered me money to disappear, and I took it. I told myself it was the smart choice, that fighting would cost too much. But you proved that silence costs more. You gave voices to all of us who were too scared to speak. If you ever want to compare notes over coffee, I owe you more than 1 cup. Roberto. I typed back a simple response. Coffee sounds good. But you don't owe me anything. We both did what we had to do. As 5 p.m. approached, I organized my desk for tomorrow's challenges. 3 new cases waited in my queue, each one a puzzle of numbers that didn't quite add up, of executives who thought they were cleverer than the math. They probably were clever, but clever wasn't the same as right. Kevin appeared again. Ms. Crowley, there's someone here to see you. Says she's from Frontier Axis. For a moment, my chest tightened. Then Susan from HR walked in, looking smaller than I remembered, older somehow. Vanessa, I'm sorry to bother you. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. What can I do for you? Susan. She shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to apologize for that day in the conference room, for not speaking up, for processing your transfer when I knew it was wrong. Her voice cracked slightly. I had 2 kids in college. I couldn't afford to lose my job, but that's not an excuse. No, I agreed quietly. It's not, but I understand it. The company's gone now. Most of us are unemployed. The pension fund is worthless. She managed a bitter smile. Turns out keeping quiet to save our jobs didn't save anything. I pulled out a business card. Ernst & Sterling is hiring for several positions. Tell recruiting I referred you. A second chance, if you want it. Her eyes widened. After everything. We all make choices. Susan, the question is what we do next. She left clutching the card like a lifeline. Another small correction to the universe's balance sheet. As I prepared to leave, I took one last look at the Wall Street Journal article. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a quote from the lead IRS investigator. This case was built on the foundation of exceptionally detailed documentation provided by a courageous whistleblower. It should serve as a warning to any executive who thinks they're above scrutiny. A warning, yes, that felt right. I locked my office and headed for the elevator. Passing the portraits of Ernst & Sterling's founding partners, stern-faced men who'd built their reputation on precision and integrity, they would have understood what I did, I think, would have appreciated the brutal elegance of using Reed's own arrogance against him. Outside, Boston's financial district hummed with end-of-day energy, somewhere in federal prison. Reed was learning that orange really wasn't his color. Patricia was probably negotiating minimum security. David was discovering what it meant to have your assets frozen. And me, I was walking to my new apartment, purchased with my legitimate salary, ready to review another set of books tomorrow, ready to find the next executive who confused being powerful with being untouchable. Reed had been right about one thing in his email. When someone laughs at your work, it's not always a joke. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's dismissal. And sometimes it's the last mistake they ever make. Because numbers don't lie. They don't care about your title or your suit or your corner office. They just wait, patient and immutable, for someone to read their story. I'd built my career on reading those stories, on being thorough when others were careless, persistent when others were comfortable, visible when others wanted me to disappear. They'd called my audit adorable, a little thing, done by a little person who didn't matter. $42 million later, $60 million. If you counted what the IRS found, it turned out I mattered quite a bit. Funny how the math always works out in the end. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this tale of corporate justice resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever stood up to power in your workplace? What happened when you refused to stay silent? Your stories matter too, and I'd be honored to hear them.